Hello, it's John Heaton, and this evening I'm going to review this album from Rolling Stones. Some Girls came out on the 9th of June 1978, and it was the first album I bought around about the time it came out, and probably in my top 2 or 3 favourite albums of all of theirs. So very good memories of it. I was 14 or so when I got it, and before I go through the tracks, I'll just show you various copies of it. I think this was the first one I got, which was when, maybe I'll show you this one first. So this was the original cover, which had various Rolling Stones dressed up as girls, plus some famous girls in this cover, which slides out. So here you go, there's one side, and then the other. But several of these famous girls complained that they hadn't been consulted and they didn't get paid or something pathetic. Anyway, so the Stones had to, they should be honoured to be on the cover. But anyway, the Stones had to basically come up with a redesign, and they sort of said, "Pardon our appearance, cover under reconstruction." So replacing all the famous girls' faces with just blank colours. But as you can still see there's Charlie Watts there, and there's Keith there, and there's George Harrison down there. So, and what I did at the time, I'm sure other people may have done this as well, I got various female friends of mine to sign it. Managed to fill up the whole album apart from 2, and thank you ladies. I'm still in touch with a few of you to this day, which is good. And then so then I'm going to show you this original version. I had the lyric sheet, but this lyric sheet didn't come with all of the copies, and then I've got a third copy, which is the new 180 gram vinyl, or the new remastered vinyl, but rather disappointingly it doesn't have the cutouts. So in fact, I don't even think this is 180 gram vinyl. It's just a new release. It's not made with the same care and attention as some of the other reissues of recent years. So that was, I mean, it wasn't too expensive, so I picked that one up. But here's my original. So, yeah, very strong album. A real return to form for the Stones. They hadn't had a critically acclaimed album for the previous 5 or 6 years since Exile on Main Street in 1972. And this album hit #1 in the US and #2 in the UK. And the lead-off single, Miss You, was a huge hit, #1 in the US, #3 in the UK, and a monster disco number, and just using the kind of genre which was around at the time, which was disco, and making it their own really, with a fantastic single. Fantastic drumming from Charlie Watts, great bass playing from Bill, and a really good vocal from Mick. Keith were around at the time of this album. I mean, he obviously did contribute to all the tracks, but he was going through a lot of difficulties. He'd just been on a drug arrest. He came pretty close to being sent to prison around this time, so maybe we're lucky that we got any album at all. It was very well received by the critics and by the fans, although I've heard some Rolling Stones purists say this wasn't a return to form and it's not on the same level as their earlier work, which you know, they're entitled to their opinion. I think it stands up really well. It came out in the midst of punk. This is the back cover, very amusing, and then it's got a profile of each of the members of the Stones as a girl, as a lady, so quite amusing. And then you don't get this with every Stones album, but the detailed musicianship lineups on all of the tracks, and Jagger is playing guitar on a good half of this album, which makes it quite a gritty album because you've got three guitars, because by this time Ron Wood had joined the band full time. He had been on Black and Blue as a kind of session guy, but he was in the band, and so on some tracks like Respectable you've got three guitars, which really beefs up the sound. And I think their previous album Black and Blue had its moments, but this is definitely a step up in my opinion. The second track, When the Whip Comes Down, kind of racy lyrics from Mick about sort of living in New York, a wild life. In fact, New York was the inspiration behind a lot of this album. It's not my favourite track, but play it loud, and it's a pretty decent rocker. And then we have a cover version of Just My Imagination, which the Stones do a really good job on. Yeah, I mean, a minor criticism, maybe it goes on a minute too long, but it's a very good choice of cover. And then the title track, very controversial. I think the record company tried to get them to drop it because some of the lyrics were a bit racy, but Mick Jagger said if you can't take a joke then it's too bad. I find it quite amusing and quite harmless really compared to some of the stuff which comes out today. It's really nothing. But he got into trouble at the time. And then Lies finishes side one. A really rollicking, fast rocker. Very hard to discern what Mick's singing about, but as I say, one of my copies does have the lyrics, so you can sing along. I know some people don't like this track. It's quite similar to the track Neighbours on To You, but I think that this is better, and I love the pace of it. It's really fast and a good contrast to the previous two tracks. So that's the end of side one, and side two opens with Faraway Ice. And here you can see from the listing that I think, yeah, who plays the piano on here? Drums, Charlie Watts. Bass, Bill Wyman. Piano, Keith Richards. Mick Jagger. So both of them are playing piano. Okay, I thought it was just Mick, but if you've ever tried to play this one, it's not too difficult a one to play, and a good departure from the Stones, from their normal type of fare, a good country pastiche, and pretty hilarious words from Mick. I think, I don't know who wrote the words, I'm presuming it was Mick, but it may have been Keith. Very amusing. The preacher at Cape Radham saying that all he had to do was send $10 to the Church of the Sacred Bleeding Heart, located somewhere in Los Angeles, California. I love it. It's Mick doing his American impression and doing it well. Maybe it's got a little tired over the years, but right at the time of this album it was pretty fresh. And then Respectable. Great track, great lyrics, great sound, really great groove the band gets on this track and on the whole album really. Before They Make Me Run is Keith's vocal spotlight, and it seems to be autobiographical because he was on the run from the police and probably from a few people at this time of his life, and just around this time he kicked his long-time heroin habit and was on the mend, but then took to whiskey for a few years, and I'm not sure what he's on now, but he was in pretty bad shape at the time of this album, but maybe that was the inspiration for this great song, because it is a superb song with Keith's very distinctive vocal, which one always likes to have on a Stones album. And then the album finishes extremely strongly with two absolute classics, Beast of Burden, which was a number 8 single hit in the US. Just brilliantly sung by Mick, great groove from the band, and kind of a slower but still danceable disco number. I love it to bits, probably in my top 10 songs of all time from the Stones. And then the album finishes with Shattered, which is an ode to living in New York City, and or one side of living in New York City, should we say. And great vocal from Mick and superb guitars from Ron and Keith, and the way they combine in the middle and go into the that chord-driven solo. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. And then great backing vocals from Keith, I assume it's Keith and Ronnie. Oopshidoobie Shad. That is just brilliant. So really strong close to the album. This is a 10 out of 10 album. And they would struggle to do anything like on the level of this. So it's their last truly classic album in my opinion. Thanks for watching. See you next time.